Modern money theory is a heterodox macroeconomic framework that fundamentally challenges the conventional assumptions about monetary and fiscal policy of states that issue their own currency and hold full sovereignty over it. This approach, shaped by economists such as Warren Mosler, L. Randall Wray, Stephanie Kelton, Bill Mitchell, and Pavlina Cherneva, draws on Abba Lerner's concept of functional finance, Hyman Minsky's financial instability hypothesis, and chartalist monetary theory. The intellectual foundation of MMT rests on the idea that the relationship between the state and money cannot be explained through the familiar household budget metaphor. While households and companies must earn income or borrow before they can spend, a sovereign government that issues its own currency does not need to earn money before spending. Rather, the money in question is issued by the state itself. According to the chartalist perspective on which MMT is based, the value of money does not stem from the backing of a metal, such as gold or silver, but from the state's ability to levy taxes in that currency. Tax obligations create a structural demand for the currency issued by the state. Thus, money becomes the necessary instrument for settling tax liabilities. In this context, the primary function of taxes is not to finance government spending, but to create demand for the currency and to contain inflation. To understand the functioning of state money, MMT proposes the following cycle. The government first injects money into the economy through spending and then withdraws it through taxation. In other words, the logic is as follows. Spending leads to money supply, leads to taxation, leads to money destruction. The sequence assumed by the traditional approach, tax first, then spend, is thus turned on its head. MMT defines a government with monetary sovereignty as an institution that can never technically go bankrupt in its own currency. While the United States, the United Kingdom, and Japan fall into this category, Eurozone countries, dollarized economies, or countries that fix their exchange rates face different constraints because they lack monetary sovereignty. However, MMT does not claim that government spending is unlimited. The real constraint is not financial, but the availability of real resources, labor, raw materials, productive capacity, and technology. If the government spends beyond the economy's real productive capacity, demand exceeds supply, and inflation becomes inevitable. For this reason, MMT views inflation not as a product of budget deficits, but as the result of excessive demand relative to productive capacity. The principle of functional finance, inherited from Abba Lerner, lies at the heart of MMT. According to this principle, the only legitimate criterion of fiscal policy is not budget balance, but achieving concrete economic goals such as full employment and price stability. A budget deficit or surplus is neither inherently good nor bad. What matters is its functional effect on the economy. According to MMT, the government's budget deficit is equal to the private sector's net financial savings. When the government runs a deficit, an equivalent amount of net financial assets is transferred to the private economy. A budget surplus, by contrast, withdraws these assets from the private economy. This relationship is an accounting identity. Government balance plus private sector balance plus external balance equals zero. MMT treats the central bank and the Treasury, for analytical purposes, as a consolidated issuer of state money. This approach does not deny that the two institutions are formally separate. However, from the perspective of a consolidated government balance sheet, it argues that the distinction is largely institutional and political in nature. MMT evaluates government bond issuance differently in monetary terms. From the perspective of a sovereign government, bond sales are not borrowing, but rather an operation that converts reserves at the central bank into bonds. There is no genuine risk of default. The risks arise from political constraints and from situations where debt is denominated in foreign currency. MMT has been subject to significant criticism. Mainstream economists primarily raise the following objections. Inflation risk. There is no disagreement that government spending can lead to inflation. The debate centers on how this risk should be managed. Critics argue that policymakers may delay intervening in time, while MMT proponents contend that mechanisms such as a job guarantee and taxation structurally limit this risk. Political economy problem. Tax increases intended to restrain spending require policy processes that are resilient to popular pressures. In practice, this may open the door to an inflationary bias. Applicability to small and open economies. In small and externally open economies, dependence on the exchange rate weakens monetary sovereignty. In countries such as Turkey and Argentina, the weakness of the local currency and the burden of external debt significantly narrow the policy space envisioned by MMT. Interest rate policy. MMT prefers fiscal policy over interest rate hikes in combating inflation. However, the comparative effectiveness of these two instruments remains empirically debated. Proponents of MMT frequently point to Japan as an example. Despite having a high public debt to GDP ratio for decades, Japan has experienced low interest rates and low inflation. This challenges the traditional expectation that sovereign states issuing their own currency will be punished by markets. On the other hand, the fiscal expansion during the post-2020 pandemic period and the subsequent global inflation surge have been extensively discussed within MMT circles. One group argued that inflation was driven by supply shocks, while others maintained that excessive demand also played a role. MMT provides important analytical contributions regarding the true nature of money and offers a strong framework that questions the inevitability of austerity policies. On the other hand, its policy prescriptions involve significant practical difficulties, particularly in terms of inflation management and applicability to economies without monetary sovereignty. While the theory has made a lasting contribution to the economic literature by challenging the assumption that a government budget operates like a household budget and reframing the debate on public spending, it has not yet fully addressed questions related to political economy and institutional dynamics. Douglas, from a different perspective, argued that there is a structural gap between production costs and consumers' purchasing power. A payments arrow. Wages, salaries, and dividends, income that goes directly to consumers. B. Payments arrow. Bank payments, raw material costs, and payments to other firms, costs that do not directly reach consumers. Price of goods equals A plus B, but consumers' purchasing power equals only A. Therefore, the economy always faces a structural demand shortfall. Consumers cannot purchase all the goods produced. To close this gap, Douglas proposed mechanisms such as social credit, a basic income-like payment distributed to citizens, and the compensated price system, where the state subsidizes prices.